I played a blitz game today. I was black. We played the Ruy Lopez, and I really wanted to try an idea in the Berlin defense, so I played knight f6. My opponent went for the main line, and I took the pawn on e4, and then d4 is the main move. You can see in the database here, d4 is played about 80% of the time. Okay, but the move d4 is a pawn gambit. Okay, black just took the pawn on e4. He can recapture it with the second most popular move, rook to e1, pressuring down this file. Black usually retreats the knight, and then white recovers his pawn, and play proceeds from there. Okay, but a stronger way to play is considered to be the move d4, which gambits a pawn. But if you look in the database, black almost never takes the pawn. E takes d4 is only played 11 times out of about 8,000 games here. But I recently made a video investigating the Berlin defense, and so I had to ask myself this question: what happens if black takes that pawn? And the engine tells me that white gets a good advantage, about a +1 advantage. But the position is a little unclear and dangerous and requires study to play it well. So I decided to try this in a blitz game. Okay, I played e takes d4, winning the gambit pawn. And the reason players don't consider that move is because of this continuation. Rook e1, pinning the knight, d5 to protect it, and then knight takes d4. And white is looking really good. He's down a pawn, but he has two threats. He's threatening to capture twice on c6, beginning with the knight and then recapturing with the pawn, and then capturing with the bishop would fork the king and the rook. And the second threat white has is the move f3, attacking the pinned knight and winning it. Okay. However, the move that I noticed was universally played in those 11 games in the database was bishop d6, which is a counter-attacking move, and it's actually very dangerous. And white should know what they're doing in this position. Okay. Doing research on the Berlin, trying to find videos on YouTube, I didn't see anybody discussing this line at all. Okay. So I decided to play it. And the point of this move, bishop d6, is it hits this h2 square. The black queen can come to h4 and also hit that square and hit f2, which the knight is attacking. So there's a big possibility of a kingside attack after bishop to d6. Now what should white do in this position? Okay, should he follow through with the f3 threat or the knight takes c6 threat? Well, it turns out best is knight takes c6. My opponent didn't go for knight c6 though. He made a blunder, f3. Okay, that turns his evaluation from a +1 to about a -1. Now black has a slight edge, and the reason is the move queen to h4. Okay. Now backing up though, what would happen after knight takes c6? Well, one way for black to proceed is bishop takes h2 check. And if the white king takes the bishop, then black has a forced draw by repetition. If white wants to continue playing and go for the win, then he can't take the bishop. He has to play king to h1. But then there comes this remarkable line, queen h4, which is threatening a discovered check, followed by a mate. Rook takes e4 is the best defense here, forking the king and the queen. And then pawn takes rook, queen to d8 check, only move is queen takes queen, then knight takes queen check from the bishop, king takes knight, king takes bishop. Now if you look at the material, black has a rook and 2 pawns for white's bishop and knight. So material is about equal. The engine gives white a slight edge in this position, but this seems playable for black. Okay, so I think the opening needs more analysis. I'd have to look into it deeper to find out how white can retain a strong advantage after black takes that gambit pawn. But anyway, back to the game. Instead of taking on c6, my opponent blundered with f3. Very human move. You attack that pin knight. But that allowed queen to h4. And that's a threat here on h2. And then white cracks here and just plays g3 to block the threat. Again, a very human move, but it's losing. Okay, white has to instead take this knight and just give up this h2 pawn like this and play from here. And now white is up a piece, but black has a couple pawns, the white king is in the open, and black can continue to attack. So it's a balanced game according to the engine. I think white has a slight advantage. But the engine evaluation really doesn't matter in positions like this. What matters is how would humans play it. Okay, but my opponent played g3, and that allowed bishop takes g3, cracking open the king side like this. And then check. Notice my knight is still pinned here. King to g1, queen f2 check, forcing the king into the corner, and the knight, the queen here has it nicely corralled in the corner. Okay, so after king h1, I take the time to castle, not so much for defensive purposes, but to release this knight. So now I have a mate threat. Knight to g3 is mate. So white has to take that knight. He does. But that also released my other knight when I castled. My other knight was pinned. Both knights were pinned. So I can get a piece back. And now I'm just one piece down. And I have 3 extra pawns. So material is about equal with the white king in a lot of danger. So this is clearly a winning position for black. Okay, my opponent played bishop e3, forking the queen and the knight. But such forks mean nothing here because there's so many checks possible. So I played queen h4 check, king g1, queen g3 check, king h1. King f1 isn't any better here. In fact, king f1, I guess, is a mate. Yeah, bishop mates. So he's got to go to h1. But then bishop g4, threatening the queen, and also threatening to come to f3. There's no defense. So my opponent plays bishop e2 to block. But I take the bishop with the knight. He takes back with the rook. And I call check as intended. And the only legal move is to block with the rook, and then the queen takes the rook and its mate. So my opponent resigned. So apparently, at least in blitz, it's a very dangerous opening for white if black takes that pawn, which is never seen in Grandmaster chess. Nobody plays that move, and I'm sure there's perfectly good reasons for it. If you turn the engine on, let it think for a while, it does give white a sizable advantage, a plus 0.6, maybe more. Now the depth is really big, 46 depth here, computed in the cloud. So 0.6, it's not a winning advantage. So if you play the Berlin defense with d4, you have to be aware of that move apparently. All right, well, thanks for watching the video.